Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of Nanoka Plays RPG Maker Kino. Or is it? Technically, this game is actually done in an engine called Wolf RPG Editor, which I think the only other thing people might know that from is maybe Prominent Symphony? But really, for all intensive purposes, this is just Temu RPG Maker, so let's not lose any sleep over it. As the story goes, you play as a guy who finds himself trapped in the MMO RPG he's playing, unable to log out. Wow, can Evangelion do anything or moving on? Unfortunately for him, instead of being a cool, dual-wielding, trenchcoat-wearing swordsman who gets all the chicks, he's stuck in the body of a goblin, unable to communicate, leading him to being hunted down by other players as EXP fodder. In desperation, he tries to get the attention of a female knight, but when that fails as well, he snaps and attacks her instead. She easily slays him, of course, but in the process, he uncovers a secret: the power of karma. Instead of dying, he is reincarnated as a slime, the other lowliest monsters in RPGs. But if he collects enough karma, well, the possibilities open up indeed. And with this new power, he vows to bring vengeance on all the girls who have ever mocked him in the past. Wow, a game where you're playing an incel monster! What a weird coincidence, you know, after the last one we did. But I digress. How do you gain karma, you ask? As you enter the tutorial, you are given your first task: killing rabbits in order to harvest that valuable resource. Now, it's not uncommon for RPGs to have you slay critters as an early game thing, and most people wouldn't think too hard on it. But in regards to what this game is trying to accomplish, just take a look at how bloody the task is compared to the usual standards of fantasy violence. It kind of reminds me of the fact that serial killers usually start off by killing small animals before moving on to humans. And what do you know? Because it isn't long before the tutorial moves on to pranking other human players, say by pushing them into the river, and finally into outright ending them for maximum karma gain. Not that this is an easy task as a slime, mind you, as even slaying your fellow goblins in solo battle takes a while, let alone the much tougher human opponents. However, because this is ostensibly supposed to simulate an MMO, there's actually a crafting and gathering system that you can participate in that also grants EXP. And early game, I think is much easier to grind karma performing these tasks than actually fighting. There's also a rudimentary time system that determines when all the other quote-unquote human players respawn, which will allow you to refarm karma off them. I can't remember how many times I pushed this one guy into the river. Now, after you have accumulated a good amount of karma, it's time to digivolve. For some reason, you do so by entering the fireplace in your home base. And I have to say, the monsters are pretty much my favorite visual related thing in this game. Just look at all these little goobers. They are the real heroines. Hashtag, not all orcs. Now, as cool of a system this is, I think there is some disconnect between what the game wants the player to do and what seems to actually be optimal in terms of gameplay. You see, the game seems to imply that you need to reincarnate through a whole bunch of monster classes because there's some sort of inheritance system in place. But if there was, I really couldn't see it, because it felt like anytime I switched classes, my characters went back to having default level 1 stats, and the grind to get them back up to speed didn't seem like it was worth the payoff. Ultimately, I ended up using the Orc for most of the game, because it had the ability to charge up for one turn to deal double damage, similar to the focus ability in Shin Megami Tensei. And then I changed to one of the slime family who specializes in counter attacks just to get around the gimmick of one of the endgame bosses. Speaking of, another point of confusion with the game is how to progress in it. The game seems to imply that you should hunt down the 6 revenge targets since they keep track of it through the wanted posters board. Incidentally, for some reason, they are only known by their class names, so like Mage, Hunter, Knight, and Soldier. I mean Soldier. Now, you would think this is because the main character has depersonalized them so much that he has reduced their identities down purely to their class functionality. But no, this is just a weird thing that Japanese MMO and tabletop RPG media do on a surprisingly frequent basis, like in Goblin Slayer. So yeah, these gals are just running around on the overworld, waiting for you to defeat them in combat, ostensibly. Because you know, it's that kind of game, so how shall I put this? There's an additional battle mechanic involved, if you know what I mean. And I guess I'll just make a quick mention of it now because I don't think it's very interesting, but you can choose to grapple them mid-combat, which will allow you to play a mini-game where you press one of the three choices, which plays a silly animation and then raises a bar. In theory, I guess some choices raise the bar much more than the others, but I pretty much just jam all the buttons until the timer runs out, which incidentally I would not recommend as your bedtime strategy in real life. If you raise the bar to max, then the enemy will get a debuff based off your current form. But I'm honestly not sure if it's ever worth the action economy as opposed to just attacking regularly. So you probably spend your time training up to defeat these girls, and then realizing that the game world doesn't seem to be budging an inch. Turns out this is because what you're really supposed to do is just use this quest bot to enter the main quests that actually do progress the game. Well, that was simpler than I thought. This is where the main bulk of the story happens. Outside of his revenge plan, the main character also seeks to sow general chaos throughout the land, leading to a bit of a cat and mouse game between him and the admins, the head who just so happens to be the knight that destroyed his goblin form all the way in the beginning of the game. He tends to win against the more simple-minded members of the cast, but faces defeat from the more clever ones, such as his stint against Hunter, where his planned ambush is instead turned around on him, leading to his own capture. He only escapes due to his knowledge that he can simply reincarnate to escape his current shell, something she was completely unaware of. The silliest main quest though is when his reputation starts to get too hot for him to handle, and he starts looking for a way to solve that problem. He comes across the data storage of the game and has a brilliant plan, deleting the data involving the memories of all of his crimes from the players involved. And incidentally, I forgot to mention, the setting is apparently a virtual reality MMO. Boy, if this ever happened in real life, I think it will constitute a serious security breach that will cause a massive lawsuit to be able to have your actual memories tampered with. Will. Anyway, the heroines just use video footage to keep track of him anyway. Yeah, he's not the smartest bulb in the room. However, some quests do show off a different side to his personality that foreshadows future events. In one of them, he rescues a newbie player who's being bullied, though he does so by slaying the men in a very bloody fashion, reducing them to scattered body parts, and then offers the newbie the opportunity to gain this power for himself. However, the newbie, scared by the brutality the main character displayed, refuses to accept. Even though he's in a bad place, he doesn't believe that hurting others is the right answer, and so he flees the scene. Oh yes, I have to mention, when you transition between areas, you get a random loading screen that usually serves to introduce an area or character. But there's one for the main character with an interesting quote: "I am evil." Except that the text is a little off, as if it was a coded message. I do wonder how the Japanese version did this. There is also another scenario where the main character, lurking in the corner of the tavern, witnesses a scene where one of the heroines rebuffs the rowdy men who are harassing her. For some reason, this activates his incel neuron and he hatches another nefarious plan. So you see, this MMO has restrictions on PvP, or in layman's terms, players cannot attack other players. However, our main character convinces them that not only is he able to lift the restrictions, he will also lock the door and cut off communication, allowing them to do whatever they want without consequences. As you may expect, the tavern soon descends into chaos, as not only do the Three Stooges attack Warrior, that's the name of the heroine, the other tavern patrons, emboldened by their actions, discard their morality and join in as well. Wow, it's just like what the Joker says about society. Here, Warrior isn't going to go down without a fight, which is where our MC jumps in and batters her to submission. By the by, you actually get the Three Stooges as NPC helpers for this battle, which is kind of amusing to me. After their victory, the main character has the feeling that he's forgotten something important. What could it be? Oh wait, he realizes that Warrior is someone who has helped him in the past, when he himself was a newbie. With that realization, he turns on the rest of the men, rather brutally, as he yells about tearing them to pieces, and tries to explain his circumstances to her. Unfortunately for him, she's not in the mood to be sympathetic, given that he was the one who put her in this situation in the first place. After all, there's nothing about his story that justifies hurting others. In a panic, he resets the scene, with everything returning as it was at the beginning, thinking that he has escaped the consequences of his actions. He repeats his mantra, "I am evil." But with the ellipses trailing off, there's a sense of sadness, as if it has stopped being fulfilling anymore. He begins to grow more and more unstable, and rather than attempt to create more plots, he devolves into randomly attacking people. The attempts at hiding his presence become clumsier and soon non-existent. The final main story quest has a particularly chilling description. "There's nobody left. I'm alone. Alone." As you may have guessed, the game soon becomes a ghost town. Who would lock into a virtual reality world with a rampaging monster with permanent consequences? The only one left are agents from the game's staff who attempt to apprehend him and are slain in response. He finds himself at the entrance of Management HQ, with only one sole remaining motivator driving him: revenge on the Knight, who he wrongly blames for his predicament. The interface itself begins to reflect his diminished mental state, turning into a blood-red mass of text. It's time for the final confrontation with Knight. You see the MC's internal thoughts, where he laments the fact that what he really wanted was to be saved, but his pride and fear of interaction of others got in the way, and he chose to lash out instead. Knight expresses a regret at the scenario as well. You see, she had meant for her virtual world to be a shelter, a second chance for those who could not attain success in real life. To watch someone fall so far means that she had implicitly failed in her dreams, and seeing his insane state, resolved to put him down as a final mercy. The final battle begins. Of course, it is the monster that trumps instead, and he transforms back into his goblin form in order to taunt Knight, which makes everything fall into place for her. He reveals the secret of karma, is powered by his guilt, and how it feeds upon itself, causing him to become more miserable the more he indulges in it. He's suffering because his actions are actually counter to his true personality. Hurting others is not his natural state of being, but a negative coping mechanism formed from despair. She tries one last time to persuade him to come to his senses, but he remains stubborn, ranting about how he is now the new ruler of the world with his power, the only thing that matters in life. Disappointed, Knight logs out of the game, and the MC gloats about his victory, until the screen begins to shake. Turns out, his existence is considered so dangerous that Knight is willing to delete the entire server to stop him. The MC tries to log out too, until he remembers that he can't do that due to his monster condition, but he confidently asserts that the power of karma will overcome that restriction. Unfortunately, he's wrong about that, and the screen zooms out to reveal his real body using the computer. watching helplessly as he desperately cries for help. His cries are unheard, of course. He is truly alone after all, and as the world is finally deleted, his body slaps forward with a thud. Well, I think they did a pretty cool allegorical tale for how young men enter the extremist pipeline and how it's ultimately self-destructive. Wait, what's this? Ending 1? And what's this new option on the title screen, which incidentally has now changed to a lighted up version of his room? Restart? Looks like the game continues, my friends. So the main character finds himself standing back where it all began, the lowly slime. But this time, he has flashbacks, including a scene where he remembers triggering the bug that led him to his monster condition, which involves glitching into an otherwise inaccessible area. He also remembers his fate at the end of it all, and figures that the only way to avoid it is to get even stronger. So he begins the process of building karma again. Only this time, it doesn't work. Unlike previously, the hunted rabbit just fades away like it was meant to, being an MMO mob. The MC even expresses curiosity as to why he had the impression that it would be a bloody affair in the first place. While pondering his current state of affairs, Soldier, that's one of the heroines if you recall, stumbles upon his lair and is impressed, confusing him for some kind of special event builder NPC. The MC is annoyed and attempts to attack her, but in his weak form, this only leads to comedy hijinks as he manages to toss himself into the fire. Soldier invites Mage over to heal him, and they proceed to just comically misunderstand his intentions, invade his personal space, and overall treat him like a mascot creature. Eventually, they decide to explore a dungeon together, inviting the slime MC to come along, and seeing the opportunity, hatches a plot. He'll simply wait for them to let their guard down while in the dungeon, and that's when he'll make his move. To the Batcave. As expected, the two girls, not exactly being the strongest adventurers around, soon find themselves biting off more than they can chew. However, to his surprise, the MC finds that he can't bring himself to follow through his original plan. Instead, he fights alongside them instead, despite his weak form. So, as the short battle I've shown reveals, the RPG gameplay has a paradigm shift at this point. Where you once fought relying on your own might, Thanatos has now become a party-based RPG where you adventure together with your allies. There were actually several clues to foreshadow this twist before now. You might remember the Three Stooges battle. But another clue is the curious weapon and armor crafting feature in the game that's accessible even back when you were a monster. Entering the menu shows it to be empty, and your monster is unable to equip anything other than accessories anyway. Sure enough, in the second half of the game, craftable gear has appeared in these menus. And all those grenades and spears that you have been ignoring because they deal a small amount of set damage that's far outclassed by your orc just clubbing things? Well, they're actually useful now, when you're pelling around with the weakest level 1 characters in the game. There's also something interesting I've observed about the change from solo to party play. While the monster forms are certainly more powerful, you will often find scenarios where the enemies will stun lock you for several turns in a row, rendering you helpless until you are lucky enough to shake off the status effect. But sometimes you're off by just one turn and end up at 0 HP, and thus a game over. In a party however, if a character loses their action, the rest of the team can chip in. The end result is that despite theoretically being weaker, team-based gameplay ends up being the less frustrating version of the game. In most other RPGs, I would definitely consider the stunlock scenario a flaw and poor gameplay design. But here, I actually think this is done intentionally to show off the folly of trying to rely only on yourself rather than try to seek support. However, in my opinion, there is one flaw in its execution, and that would be that while your level is reset to 1, for some reason the game allows you to keep all of your items from the previous part, and it's very easy to power a game by say stocking up on the EXP granting items. but also all of the previous attack items I just mentioned. While it did allow me to get into the story quicker, I did think that the feel they intended would be better achieved if you had to craft all those spells and potions from scratch to simulate going on a low-level adventure with your friends. Back to the story, Limekun realizes that despite his good deed, he still can't enter the city, since the game code prevents monster NPCs from entering, which he technically still is. And he remembers how he needed to use karma to overcome that restriction in the past. He begins to consider other options, attacking other players, and goes over his list of targets. But having now actually interacted with soldier and mage as people, he tears down their posters, as he is no longer able to depersonalize them. He sets his sights on Hunter instead. As usual, Hunter proves to be the smarter one by overturning the ambush again, but while the MC gives her the slip, as soon as he reaches his home base, he is struck by the realization that perhaps she specifically let him go in order to track him there. So he leaves in order to confirm his suspicions. He is correct, but there is a curveball when he witnesses an unusual scenario. A group of men harassing Hunter. Enraged, he tosses them all into the river below. But before Hunter can assume he did so to save her, he pounces on her. However, he flashbacks to the time with Soldier and Mage, and stricken by his conscience, walks away instead. Realizing that he has no longer the will to perform the cruel actions necessary to claim power, he lies in bed and ponders about the sad fate that awaits him, to live forever as a cursed monster with no one the wiser for all eternity. He wakes up to find Hunter just standing in his home. Yeah, he just forgot about the whole she was tracking him down part. However, to his surprise, he's able to piece together what has happened to him despite his inability to communicate, and even manages to avoid a misunderstanding in regards to his incel target bot, making her pretty much one of the smartest characters in the game. They even put together a plan to help him out of his situation. First off, by finding a way to transform into a more humanoid form. After all, with a monstrous form, he's not going to get much sympathy when others are already conditioned to think of him as a monster. And the literal physical inability to communicate due to his monster physique not being able to speak in human tongues only makes the situation worse. I can't help but think that this bit is also a lot more allegorical than just working within the context of the story. While adventuring together to accomplish this, the MC sacrifices himself to save Hunter from a sneak attack by a monster, and that's when a miracle occurs. He's aware that he'll simply be reincarnated into another form, but to his surprise, his new form is humanoid. However, he's also quick to realize that this is merely the shape of a doll rather than an actual human. But with the ability to speak, actual communication is now possible, and so the group gathers together for a discussion. He tells them all about karma, including the rabbit farming, then the player killing, and finally the grappling, none of which he wants to do anymore. The girls, however, comically misinterpret the last one as simply being casual zags, which still causes an over-the-top reaction from Soldier, given her general overprotective nature towards the more innocent mage, and so they leave. Hunter stays behind, willing to help him, despite his insistence that she doesn't have to put herself through it if she doesn't want to, but she asserts that she's doing this of her own free will and doesn't feel forced at all. So instead of grappling, they hug. After the deed is done, they return to the city entrance for another try, but unfortunately, he still fails to enter. After all, karma powers itself off negative emotions, and what they just did was anything but. However, a strange light suddenly emits from the MC's body, and on a hunch, he tries again. This time, he succeeds. It seems that there's another mysterious force acting upon the world, one that rewards good deeds instead, and it is this that he now draws upon. With this, the game now encourages you to do a bit of adventuring with your new friends, and we can assume some time is spent on doing so. Our group find themselves in the tavern again, this time celebrating together. A stark contrast to when the MC was originally brooding alone in a corner, plotting revenge on the world. While Soldier and Mage are their usual wacky self, the MC and Hunter have a moment together. They re-examine their past in regards to the game. Both of them are what we call solo players. It's a real-life thing where, despite the appeal of an MMORPG supposedly being the huge number of players interacting with each other, some people choose to play alone anyway. The two of them only partied up because sometimes it was the most efficient way of game progression. Their party members were merely strangers that had gathered together for a task and then scattered across the winds once they were done. Looking at their newfound friendship, the old way they experienced the game seems so silly now. Without the community aspect, wasn't what they were doing the equivalent of just taking on a second job? It's an interesting scene that I think also does a good job of developing Hunter, and explains why she was most motivated to help out the MC over the other girls. She must see something of herself in him, which helps with empathizing with his original situation. Unfortunately, before anything can develop further, something strange happens. A familiar scenario seems to be repeating itself. One of the Stooges slashes another player, which draws blood once again, and yells out about his newfound power of karma. But wait, if MC Kwon is now a good guy, then who was Phone? He once again says warrior, but then Knight bursts onto the scene, and fearing a misunderstanding, the MC flees past her, rather than trying to explain himself. By the way, I like how Warrior just casually appears in your base after this event as a full-fledged party member. After some time, the MC is kidnapped by Assassin. Oh, I kinda forgot to mention her, I guess. She actually appeared much earlier in the story as Knight's right-hand woman and friend. And despite the AG name, she's actually the goofier of the pair. Anyway, he's brought to Knight for interrogation. Now keep in mind that he was brought back in time after Knight slays his original goblin form for attacking her in frustration. So despite his change of heart since then, he has trouble convincing them of his innocence and they threaten to erase him. Luckily, Hunter bursts onto the scene to the rescue, reprimanding the pair for almost making a grave mistake. But as it turns out, it was merely an act to confirm that he was truly innocent. The two of them have given the true culprit the codename of No Data, as that is what the game system indicates when trying to scan it, and notes the strange similarities between the two of them. The culprit has been described as looking like a man wearing a cloak, but being a monster underneath. They agree to team up together to resolve this, and for the MC, it's not just to clear his name, but because he genuinely wants to help the people of the world now. Because of this, they set up home base in Management HQ, which is a change of scenery, I suppose. Now that you have all 6 potential party members recruited, the game goes into a rather familiar endgame structure that all JRPG fans should be familiar with, clearing your companion's side quests. You don't have to do them all, but you do need to do at least one, and while there isn't any character-based endings, this is where the undeveloped characters get a bit of their due time. And yes, you can probably guess the reward for finishing a character's side quest, because we have now become a harem anime. In all honesty, I think the first half of the game was probably a bit more interesting given the unique setup. It was an interesting bit of criticism, one which feels more real when it comes from within the community itself versus external moral busybodies trying to claim a high ground. Though I have to say, has anyone actually had a change of heart after reading these sort of deconstructive stories? Like, I assume most people who consume these games know the difference between fiction and reality and can separate their real life from their entertainment, but if you were the sort of person who was literally the main character from the first half, would you have turned over a new leaf? Let me know in the comment section, dude. Anyway, back to the main story. Knight informs you that they have managed to locate no data and to engage it as soon as possible. She warns you that it disguises itself as a boss monster, which took other players by surprise. And true to her word, that is exactly what happens in the boss battle ahead. No data flees after the battle, and the party has a hunch as to where the final confrontation will happen. At the source where it all began. Before the final battle though, the MC and Knight have a heart-to-heart talk where she wonders about his life before his transformation into a monster, and his plans when this is all over. He expresses his desire to take a break from the game for a while. Ironically, while he would happily no-life marathon and MMO in the past, being stuck in one has removed all the appeal of that, and he has finally realized the value of friendship, and all those other chapters from a self-help book stuff. But before the final battle, one of the girls brings up something weird about his scenario. As you recall, even when he had the power to break the rules, he was unable to log out. Yet all of the random mooks wielding karma could seemingly do so. But then again, we can probably ponder that later, after we have stopped no data evil plans. Why does he want to do this? Apparently it's to avoid being deleted. And hold on a second. The final battle begins, and while it's not exactly a tactical masterpiece, I would like to point out the gameplay story integration, that the final boss is weak to light element attacks, which Knight conveniently has access to, seeing as how she has taken on the role of main heroine. After the battle, no data blows them away, but the MC jumps and grabs onto him and confirms his suspicion. As you might have guessed, no data is in fact MC Kwon. Specifically, he has used the power of karma in order to send himself back in time to avoid his original fate, but doing so split him into two halves, one good and the other evil. They continue to fight, though in an unwinnable battle that ends after 3 turns. This is when Knight re-enters battles, overhearing a story that the MC was telling about himself, one where he helped a young girl in the past. It turns out Knight was that girl, and that act inspired her to become the woman she is today, one who wanted to use her MMO for the purpose of rehabilitation, rather than as a simple money-making product. This brings up another theme of the game, and interestingly, it turns out that the word karma isn't just a random word they pick because it looked cool. Karma is the belief that what one does affects their future, both good and bad. Just as evil deeds lead to future evil, so do good deeds lead to another in turn. Together, they defeat the other MC, but it's not battle that exorcises him, but rather the MC accepting that evil is a part of everyone, but there's no need to shoulder the burden alone. With the danger to the virtual world taken care of, the MC announces his plans to take some time off in the real world. But they are positive that he'll return and adventure together with them again when he's good and ready. He agrees, prepares to log out, and... what's going on? He's still stuck in the MMO. Knight decides to investigate the matter and reveals the results in a private conversation with him. As it turns out, so the mystery behind that plot point has been revealed. As it turns out, when he entered the bug area, he somehow suffered an accident and his physical body was slain. Normally, when someone passes away in real life while locked into the game, they will be deleted as they were no longer supposed to exist. However, the bug area he was in was isolated from the game code that would do so, leaving his consciousness trapped in the MMO. The MC panics, but Knight insists that she will do everything in her ability to help him. The screen fades to white, and we see the MC back at his computer, this time in a bright, healthy environment rather than his dark and dreary room. He thanks Knight for giving him a second chance in life and how he'll live to the fullest from here on. Wow, what an ending! There's a lot of ways to interpret this. A fade to white has sometimes been used to denote the passing of a character, and perhaps the realization of his deceased state has allowed him to pass on to the afterlife. But Personally, my theory is that given that Knight is the administrator of a virtual world in the first place, perhaps she's created a segment of the world that's effectively an emulation of the real world and placed the MC there. Sure, you could question as to whether that would actually be considered the real world, but with presented as real enough, is there really a difference to him? There's no resurrecting the dead after all, so perhaps this is the best option for him to have a semblance of a happy ending. Oh wait, no. Turns out that in the post-game content, you can just ask Knight and she'll explain the ending. Apparently they just cloned his physical body and then transferred his consciousness into the new clone body, thus effectively reviving him in the real world. Wow, can Soma do anything original? Well, that was more simple than I thought. Also, I realized that I suppose I should expect the world to have a very high technological level if they really have hyper-realistic VR MMOs, but the knowledge that he has casual cloning tech just kind of comes out of the left field, and I think it will seem less of a Deus Ex Machina if we saw what real life looked like at some point outside of that monitor shot. I think this is one of those times where leaving the question unanswered would work much better. But I have one final question. Why is this game named Thanatos? Now, as a fake Persona 3 fan, I know that Thanatos is the Greek god of death, or something like that. So I kind of thought that a game named that would be about, I don't know, the struggle with one's mortality? I mean, I know the MC died in the plot twist and all that, but it doesn't really feel like the main focus of the game. Then again, I guess there isn't really a god of incels to name the game after. Or maybe there is, please let me know down in the comments. So that was Thanatos. It's a game with a unique narrative, and although I don't think the execution was completely there, the high concept is interesting to say the least, and definitely showcases the sort of exploration that only doujin games can tackle. And I look forward to experiencing more of them. Anyway, this has been Nanoka, signing out. Hey everyone! Sorry for the wait, but this has been a bigger project, since it's a full-fledged story-focused RPG, rather than action platformers and all that. If you would like to see an uncut version of the video and support me, you can access my Patreon through my YouTube profile page. I wish I still had the ability to direct link, but that's the decline of YouTube for you. I still have other RPG Maker keynote and games I want to cover, so stay tuned for the future.